The views expressed on the Final Straw Radio do not necessarily reflect those of Asheville FM, Friends of Community Radio, or any of the affiliate radio stations airing the show. From the studios of Asheville FM, 103.3 FM in Asheville, North Carolina, this is The Final Straw, and I'm William Goodenough. The show will later be archived at thefinalstrawradio.noblogs.org, and you can email us with questions or suggestions at thefinalstrawradio@riseup.net. Also, if you're interested in rebroadcasting any episode or segment of the show, you are free to do so. Just send us an email if you choose to do that. If you care to, you can send us letters at The Final Straw, care of Asheville FM, 864 Haywood Road, Asheville, North Carolina, 28806. The show is brought to you by Firestorm Books and Coffee. Located at 610 Haywood Road, Firestorm Books and Coffee is a worker-owned cooperative in Asheville, specializing in offbeat, underground, and independent literature. You can find a sample of Firestorm's catalog of books and zines, plus a full calendar of events at their website, firestorm.coop.
The following is a recording of the Anti-Repression panel that took place in Denver, Colorado prior to the North American Anarchist Black Cross Conference in October of 2017. I'd like to apologize for the sound quality, as the venue had a fan system running that comes up in the audio, but the words are well worth hearing. For the hour, we'll hear from a few perspectives of resistance in the U.S. currently. First, we hear from Danica from occupied territory of Portland about work around anti-colonial Antifa resistance and self-defense in the Northwest. After that, we hear Firehawk talking about work in unceded Pueblo, Colorado, about projects engaging with femme, queer, and trans prison rebels, the Unstoppable zine, and the Fire Inside project. Following that, Montana talks about autonomous relief work in Houston after Hurricane Harvey and the slow disaster that is the white supremacist capitalism in Texas. Next, we hear Jude talking about the J20 conspiracy cases coming out of the inauguration of Donald J. Trump, #45. The court case moving forward, and up until a few weeks ago, this stuff was all up to date. Actually, a few changes that are worth mentioning, though, are that A, the first defendant convicted, Dane Powell, has been released, and there's a linked support site for his post-release. 2 of the riot charges have been dropped so riot and conspiracy to riot have been dropped from felony to misdemeanor, which is great. Finally, the first court dates have been moved forward to November 15th, and info about how you can help support those going to court can be found at itsgoingdown.org/J20-case-need-no, or at defendj20resistance.org. Lastly, we will hear from Jess, who has been working with water protectors doing legal collective work up in so-called North Dakota, mostly with cases concerning Standing Rock, with a very in-depth report back on wider repression and specific case details. And now some words from anarchist prisoner Sean Swain.
What you say, what you say, what you say, In Ohio prisons, pretty much everyone is in a gang, whether they're in a gang or not. If you're an Ohio prisoner and you're not in a gang, prison administrators will put you in one. And if there's no gang for you, they'll just create a new one. The reason is it's a federal block grant swindle. Here's how it works. The U.S. Department of Justice keeps a kind of database on what it calls security threat groups, or STGs, not to be confused with STDs, or sexually transmitted diseases. The Department of Justice does not monitor chlamydia or gonorrhea, yet, as far as I know. What it does monitor, security threat groups, includes organizations like the Bloods of the Crips, the Gangsta Disciples, the Aryan Brotherhood. Those are the larger, more recognizable so-called security threat groups. So, to keep a handle on these groups, the U.S. Department of Justice gives what it called block grant funding to states. States like Ohio that participate in the STG monitoring program maintain a database that it shares with the Department of Justice, keeping files on gang members and their activities. For each gang member the state monitors, the Department of Justice allots a certain amount of funds. The more gang members, the more money the state prison system gets. Back in the 1990s, you had a handful of gangs or security threat groups. Each of those gangs had a handful of pretty visible members. There was an investigator at each prison, whose job was principally something else, who kept files on these gangs. Since then, with the availability of federal block grants, we now have seemingly hundreds of security threat groups, some of them having only 2 or 3 members, all registered in the computer database. We have seemingly tens of thousands of gang members filling the Ohio prisons. And we have not one, but two investigators employed full-time at every Ohio prison, with their salaries covered by block grant funds, their office expenses covered by block grant funds, their computer hardware for conducting their work covered by federal block grant funds. Gangs are an industry. I know prisoners who have been listed as gang members for simply growing up in a specific area, where most of the kids join a specific group, or for getting junk mail from an organization not listed as a gang. A Jewish friend of mine was secretly gang-jacketed as a Black Panther for years for no reason at all and didn't even know it. You'll recall that I was gang-jacketed in 2012 as being a leader of the Army of the 12 Monkeys, an organization without an organization, on the basis that my ideology matched theirs. So, because I imagined a world without leaders, I became a leader of an organization that has no organization. None of this seems dubious to the folks who maintain the files. In all of this, the investigators themselves, those who are rewarded with job security by the existence of gangs and gang members, who do the validating of gangs and gang members. That is, the investigators decide what a security threat group is and decide what organizations or groups meet that definition, and then further decide what membership in the group means and what constitutes evidence of membership. Some religions have been validated as security threat groups. Some prisoners have been validated as members for associating with other prisoners that prison officials assign to the same cell. So, saying hi to the prisoner that was moved into your cell could make you a gang member, which might be the gang, the Presbyterians, if the prison's investigator happens to be an overly sectarian Southern Baptist. Essentially, the security threat group database is like a cash register. Every time a prison investigator punches the keyboard, another check pops out. Their kids' braces and college educations are dependent on these investigators constantly expanding the number of gangs and gang members to monitor. So gangs proliferate, even if they don't. And keep in mind, these gang jackets don't just get deleted when you step out of prison. Oh no, this is a federal database. So if you get gang jacketed in prison as the Grand Poobah of the Banana Gang, whether it exists or not, when you get out, that local cop pulling you over can punch in your license plate number and get an alert that you are likely armed and dangerous. Your high school-age nephew, who borrowed your car to take his girlfriend to the movies, might just get surrounded by SWAT teams and snipers because of a broken taillight. Recently, Juggalos sued the Department of Justice when the DOJ refused to take Juggalos out of their security threat group database. In case you don't know, Juggalos are fans of the rap group called Insane Clown Posse. Juggalos are generally dressed up like clowns and drink a lot of Faygo-branded soft drinks. That's their thing. But, according to prison investigators, their proclivity to listen to the same music and enjoy the same soft drinks, and to apparently share a kind of subculture, makes them a security threat group. Their lawsuit is currently pending. In the meantime, whatever you do, don't let it slip to prison investigators if you enjoy Faygo soft drinks. This is anarchist prisoner Sean Swain from War and Corruption in Lebanon, Ohio. If you're in the Federal Security Threat Group database, you are the resistance.
You can write to Sean Swain at Sean Swain 243-205 Warren CI, P.O. Box 120, 5787 State Route 63, Lebanon, Ohio 45036. Updates on his situation and more writings by Sean can be found at seanswain.org.
Prison organizing on the outside that come and get together in the Denver area and have this conference focused on those areas of organizing and resistance. And this year we decided to try something a little bit different because it's been a really wild year already and it's not over yet. So like knock on wood, 2017 is still sentient and can hear us. But it's been a hard year already, but it's also been a really incredible year full of amazing resistance, ranging from prisoners rising up within the prisons to people doing disaster relief efforts throughout North America for all kinds of things, ranging from the wildfires to hurricanes, etc. And then also just a lot of other really incredible resistance that we have all of these lovely people here to share with you guys a little bit about the organizing that they've been involved with over the last year. So I think what we're going to do is maybe if people just want to briefly introduce themselves really quick, and then from there each person is going to share a little bit, maybe about 5 minutes worth of what it is that they've been doing, the work that they're invested and involved in, and then we'll have time to open it up for questions and answers. And if you're somebody who is not quick to raise your hand to talk in front of other people, we'll also have some papers and pens where you can write questions down and give it to either myself or this person in back there who raised their hand. Yeah. So we'll have that stuff back there if you prefer to write down a question that you want to ask. And we also have Folks from the Final Straw podcast, which if you don't listen to, is a really fantastic podcast. But they're going to be recording this panel. We're just going to record the beginning part when people are sharing up here, but we're going to turn it off for Q&A, so don't feel like that's going to limit the types of questions or discussions that people may want to have.
Hi, my name is Jess, and I've been living up in so-called North Dakota since November of last year, mostly helping in both the legal collectives with the water protectors who have open cases on the state and federal level.
My name is Jude. I have been involved with J20 conspiracy case, the kind of solidarity support organizing, so I'll be talking about that tonight.
Hi, I'm Montana. I come from Houston, and I'm going to be talking about relief work there.
And I'm Danica. I live in occupied territory in Portland, Oregon, and I do work around Antifa, anti-colonial Antifa work.
Hey everyone, I'm Firehawk, and I live in unceded territory in Pueblo, Colorado, and I do work with prison rebels, especially femme prison rebels.
I can go first. I want to go first because I want to acknowledge that we are on occupied territory of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Southern Ute people, and that this place known as Denver is actually a convergence place, historical convergence place of resistance that's been happening since time immemorial. And so that's one of the reasons why I always like coming to Denver and talking about resistance, because this is a place of historical resistance. And so we want to acknowledge that we're on this occupied territory that was stolen from the indigenous people that use this land for generations and generations. I'm going to introduce myself in my own tribal language. Alato, Achishiokshulubo, Hilili Fishik. I'm Danica, and I'm Choctaw of the White Crane Clan. I'm Scottish of the Ross Clan. I was born and raised in northern New Mexico in a little village called Chimayon. And my mother came from a long line of resistors. Her great aunt was a grand jury resistor during the Red Scare. My father was an indigenous resistor who fought for our community's right to practice our religion. And so I come from a long line of indigenous and communist practices. And so I currently am organizing with a group of mostly African and Native women who we do African Indigenous and Native American Indigenous solidarity work, where we talk about anti-colonialism and resistance. And I also organize with the Pacific Northwest Antifa Workers Collective, and the work that I do with them primarily is focused on community defense and resistance. We do self-defense training, whether it's hand-to-hand or weapons training, with primarily femmes, women, queer folk, and people of color. We're not really interested in training kind of people who benefit from patriarchy and white supremacy to learn how to use weapons. We want to counter that kind of narratives. And we do a lot of security for different activities and events that are happening in Portland, Oregon. Some of you may know that we are being berated by this white nationalist group called the Patriot Prayer Group, which is this one guy from Washington who comes, he's taken it upon himself to basically, what he says, break the liberal strongholds on the West Coast. So he organizes events every week, every other week in Seattle, Portland, and in the Bay. And so we counter those events that he has. And at those events, there's usually a number of white nationalists who participate in those events, neo-Nazi skinheads, Proud Boys. He has this big Samoan kid who's his bodyguard that likes to assault women and femmes. And so we usually are asked or tasked to provide security at those events. And so that's what we do. And that we will continue to provide security and safety and self-defense trainings for our community. PNW, we do all kinds of resistance work in this area. We gather intel on local fascists, white supremacists, white nationalists. We organize with Rose City, Antifa in community resistance. We provide security at different events. We've done things like evict white supremacists from their living situations when asked. We've confronted people who've been assaultive to women and femmes and trans folks. And we also have been currently engaging in some processes of accountability for people who benefit from patriarchy and colonization. So we actually just started a patriarchy study, but it's the intersection of anti-colonialism and patriarchy, and that kind of work. And I'm really excited about that group because it's not just a study, it's actually like a self-reflective process that we're asking people who benefit from patriarchy and white supremacy to go through versus just reading some articles and talking about it. And so I'm pretty stoked about that, actually. And so I think I was asked to, and I'll kind of wrap this up, I was kind of asked to present on this panel because I just did a presentation at the Torch conference that was called Let's Talk About Your Nazi Killing Grandpappy. And it was really what I'm asking people is to kind of step back and look at how colonialism has impacted the work that we're doing in leftist organizing, primarily in Antifa work, and asking us to kind of look at what I call the three pillars of colonialism, which is white supremacy, patriarchy, and capitalism. And right now for me, like, what I'm really asking primarily those who benefit from patriarchy and colonialism is to take a step back and start looking at your privilege in that position, and primarily looking at and addressing misogyny in our work, because I just will speak for myself, I'm really tired of it. So I spend more time talking about internalized misogyny in our organization than I do confronting white supremacists in the streets. And that's where we'll leave it. Check.
Hey, I'm Firehawk. Thanks so much, Danica, for that introduction. So I work with a few collectives. Really quickly, I work with a political education group that's based in Denver and Pueblo, Colorado. We go into prisons that are designated for women or folks that the state has identified as women. And we hold classes to sort of talk about what resistance and rebellion looks like for people on the inside, and to try to embolden that, and especially sort of like help them use the tools that they already have and own before they even got into prison in the first place. So the other thing that I help with is Unstoppable. It's a publication that's written by people in women's prisons, but also non-binary prisoners and trans prisoners. So that comes out, we're hoping twice a year, with the idea that, again, circulating radical information and just stories of survival is going to sort of like help people become emboldened and, you know, take greater risks with what they're comfortable with in prison. And then the last thing that I'm involved in is the Fire Inside Collective. So we have collected reports and words from people who were involved in the September 9th prison strike, which was the biggest nationally coordinated strike in world history, as far as we know. And basically it's a sort of dialogue between prisoners, but also dialogue between prisoners and supporters, and praise for how well support has been, especially during the era of resistance in the first few months, and then also the repression that came afterwards. But it's also a call to action for supporters, in that there are a lot of prison rebels who are maybe were put in the hole for an indefinite period of time for their resistance and their involvement in these acts, and that the follow-up support is sort of something that is needed. And so I think it's a great, there's a lot of specific critiques and specific calls to action that I think are very doable and achievable for stronger and more robust anarchist resistance. In terms of, supporting prisoners, we do ask for certain, principles to be met, and that's basically that, we ask that they are down for liberation and that they're not down for oppressing any kind of group. So, sort of taking these stances against patriarchy and misogyny for sure, but also against racism. And unfortunately, the prison system is something that is extended directly from chattel slavery, something that is extended directly from Spanish colonialism in the United States, very much has an internal racial dynamic and an internal misogynistic dynamic that pits prisoners against prisoners. And so, though we definitely advocate that prisoners rise up and fight the people who are putting shackles on their arms and feet every day, we also ask that they confront misogyny and injustices that are happening within the prison, because unfortunately not all of our imprisoned comrades have the virtue and benefit of only fighting the man, so to speak, right? Trans prisoners are unfortunately harassed and attacked from all different angles. And so, we are basically trying to, spread the kind of liberation principles that we try to practice on the outside into prisons. And I think that there could be more done, and I think that it's a really exciting time. Just since September 9th, we've seen so much activity still. So there was a huge planned action, right, leading up to September 9th of last year, where so much materials were sent in, and people were corresponding with rebels or would-be rebels, and September 9th, I think, was a great success. And since then, there are so many riots that we couldn't even try to plan for, right? Like these spontaneous actions that erupt because the boot is still on people's necks, very much so. McCormick Penitentiary in South Carolina, for example, just recently, I think it started in August, they started limiting water rations to prisoners where they only had 8 ounces of water a day. It's a water bottle a day. And so prisoners took over, right? And there was no planning for that. They just could not take the conditions of confinement that they were forced to bear anymore, and rioted. Took the roof, took the cell, or took the cell block. And since then, prison administrators have been reacting with even more repression and threatening to withhold water, which they actually have done. We saw prisoners in certain federal penitentiaries and jails in Houston, for example, where there were reports of people needing to get water from the toilet bowl, right? So when we talk about the boot being on people's neck, it's literally life and death, and people are dying, and we're not going to take that, and people on the inside aren't going to take that. So I'm really proud to be in correspondence with folks who are just really taking this seriously and are only going to stop fighting when either they're in a grave or they are free, and all of their comrades are free. So thank you so much.
I'm Montana from Houston, and I am originally from Southern California, but moved to Texas in the end of 2012. And I'm not from Houston, but Houston is definitely the only place I have ever called home. So it's a little emotional actually for me to talk about this, which I didn't realize till I was up here. But I guess to like kind of do some justice around talking about relief work, I have to give like kind of a frame of Houston, because a lot of people think of Houston as this like, I don't know, like whatever cowboy, like white Texas cliche folks have in their head, but it's actually this like beautiful, like terrible city that is actually mostly for Black and brown folks, and is a city built on exploitation of Black and brown labor in the energy sector. So like literally like exploitation of Black and brown bodies and the land that it's occupied from extraction. And so this flood has been incredibly racialized, since it is like the most racially diverse city and the most segregated city. It's a lot, you can ask me questions about it. But I wanted to highlight some work that's going on. It's a little bit hard to highlight all the works. There's so much happening and it's changing so fast all the time. But there's this really great organization that I just wanted to highlight called West Street Recovery, which is Houston folks that have been doing basically stuff in their neighborhood since the flood happened and are now kind of like forming a group, but they were pretty much out there saving their neighbors from their roofs or like giving supplies to people, and then we're kind of like, oh, we're doing all this work, maybe we should just become a collective. What's happening right now is some cool stuff where like they are doing case management work, which they went with Black Lives Matter to this place called Trinity Gardens, which is in Northeast Houston, which is a mostly Black neighborhood, and like went and canvassed and kind of surveyed the damage and surveyed needs of different families, and have been following up every week with these families for like the last almost 2 months since the flood, and like making sure they're getting the resources that they need. A lot of folks don't have internet or smartphones, so they've been researching researching stuff for them because they don't have access to that, and just making sure that they're getting connected to these resources. And then right now also folks are like starting to talk about rebuilding, which is it's kind of just like whispers right now because there's so much work to be done. There's still so many houses to be gutted. There's still so many families who don't want to gut their houses because they want FEMA to see the damages, or are living in apartments where the landlord is trying to get, free labor from nonprofits and stuff to gut, and not acting on it themselves. So there's so much damage that's going on, but still looking forward to talking about rebuilding. Like people are trying to make efforts to make sure that the rebuilding is like happening by local contractors and like local labor to like kind of help the economy or whatever, but like to give resources to people. And then, I don't know, it's like work is really important because we can't rely on the state and we can't rely on the government, and I feel like it's like redundant to say that to like this group of folks, but it's really real. And I feel like we like talk about this a lot, but once you kind of see these like people in city that you care about really go under and like not have anything, it like kind of hits home. And like to see Black and brown folks like living in like toxic mold for however long because they don't like, they might be undocumented and like scared to report it, or they just like think that they can't, that, like I said, like they think that if they keep it that FEMA's gonna write them a check when FEMA's like not writing checks, and people are getting sick from it, and we're trying to do our best to kind of respond to all these things going on.
From the studios of Asheville FM, 103.3 FM in Asheville, North Carolina, this is The Final Straw, and I'm William Goodenough.
You're listening to audio from a panel about ongoing anti-repression work from around the so-called U.S. So far, we've heard about Antifa and self-defense in the Pacific Northwest, prison rebel support in the Southwest, plus prisoners suffering repression from participation in the 2016 September 9th National Prisoner Strike, and also we've heard about autonomous disaster relief in Texas after Hurricane Harvey. Next up, we'll be hearing from Jude from Tilted Scales, talk about updates on the J20 inauguration case in D.C., where about 200 people are facing decades in prison in a large conspiracy case that saw a few broken windows. A couple of updates to Jude's statements are that the first cases have now been moved up from November 20th to November 15th, which is this week. Also, Dane Powell, the first defendant in the case to be convicted, has been released, and his post-release support site can be found at actionnetwork.org/fundraising/Dane-is-heading-home-fund. Finally, 2 of the initial 8 felony charges, engaging in a riot and conspiracy to riot, have been dropped to misdemeanors, thus shaving decades from the potential sentences of the defendants. We here at The Final Straw suggest that Judge Leibowitz use a secure Tor browser to visit https://dropj20.org to learn more about ending this expensive, insulting, and dangerous act of political persecution that is the J20 case. After hearing from Jude, we'll hear some words from Jess, who is involved in legal support for water protectors at Standing Rock and beyond. Jess will be sharing info on those still serving time or facing charges, legal strategies imposed by the state, and other legal strategies used by the defense to fight back, and how one can get involved in defending those who are defending the earth.
My name is Jude. I've been doing a lot of solidarity organizing with the J20 conspiracy case defendants. So on January 20th, Inauguration Day out in D.C., there was an anti-capitalist, anti-fascist march that was really brutally attacked by the police. And early in the morning, there was like a kettle, so the cops surrounding people did not give them any way of exiting that area, and ended up arresting 230 people. And initially, so first, like, they're all held in the streets for like hours and hours, and not given access to like bathrooms or like water or anything like that. So people had to like kind of like organize like within themselves in order to take care of some of those like very basic bodily functions that they were not given any like opportunity, any like a way of dealing with, while the police were like holding them there on the streets, and then eventually processing them and charging everybody, like, or almost everybody initially, with a handful of felonies, and they're all facing 10 years in prison. Very quickly after they were released, the prosecutor added additional felonies, and so there's about 214 people at that point who are facing multiple felonies, including conspiracy to riot, and they're facing 75 years in prison. So there have been a handful of non-cooperating plea agreements since then, and so right now there's around 190-something defendants who are still fighting the charges and still planning to go to trial, like to, hopefully, and like with aspiration, like defeating those charges. And the trials begin on November 20th, so like about a month now, and I'll jump into that in a second. So if we kind of backtrack to like right at January 20th, January 21st, people who were arrested, who were kettled, had to deal with all those things in the streets, and then all of the harassment, antagonisms, and like maltreatment from the police while they were in custody, and they got out and were facing those felonies. Everybody was like released, and most people were either able to secure attorneys or appointed attorneys. DC has this really weird thing where the judges can both assign you an attorney. They don't really have much say over like which attorney you get. Some people have been assigned civil defense attorneys who don't have any experience with criminal law. And so when people are facing 75 years in prison and all these like multiple felonies, including conspiracy, some of the lawyers don't even have experience in anything related to that, but like would be maybe very well poised to help them with like a landlord dispute or something. So like people are in different situations, and there are also some people have been assigned the rates for their attorney. So the judge said, here's your attorney, and you have to pay X amount of dollars every week or every month, like for this attorney. And then those defendants like don't necessarily have any guarantee that their attorneys will like respond to emails or phone calls or do any work in their cases or whatnot. So like things have been all over the place with people's legal situations, and yet the prosecution has been kind of pushing things forward in very draconian, very intense ways that are not only just focused on the case itself, like going after the defendants and doing things like trying to crack security, like encryption on cell phones, which to our knowledge they have not successfully done. But there were some cell phones, a good number of people who were arrested with cell phones that did not have encryption, that were not password protected. There's been a lot of data taken off of those cell phones. One cell phone had about 10,000 pages of data that was retrieved from the cell phone. Whatever that would look like as far as like the page count, but basically like a whole ton of data off the cell phone. So like that's like one thing. Cell phones that were encrypted, whether they like, it's kind of unknown whether those cell phones that were encrypted had like Signal or any other encrypted apps on them, because the prosecution cannot get into them as far as we know, which is a good thing. That's something that should be done. A lot of people also were not arrested with cell phones, which is even a better thing if you have to in fact get arrested. So like those are the things like in the case. So the prosecution's been trying to get that information. It's also done things like they have like gotten information from like Apple iCloud, or trying to get information from Facebook, from people's like personal accounts, There's a web host that was the web host provider or whatever for disruptj20.org, which was a website that was used to kind of advertise and promote the inauguration protest. And the prosecution subpoenaed data off of that web host, including up to about 3 million IP addresses from distinct individuals who went to that website at some point kind of leading up to the inauguration protest. There have been a range of different legal challenges to some of these things. Some of those are very much in the works still, so what the prosecution will actually have the ability to see is still being worked out on those various different fronts. And while that's all been going on, the prosecution also been doing a lot of different things in court and also within legal filings to basically put forward this narrative that anybody who is associated with the protests, that could be people who went to the website, people who organized, people who were present that day, regardless of any individual so-called evidence that the prosecution may have about any person's particular activities or whatnot, what they're wearing that day or anything like that. The prosecution then basically put this very simple idea forward that anyone who's associated in any kind of way is guilty of conspiracy, is guilty of all those different felonies. And the way that conspiracy law works is that if in fact the prosecution is able to get a conviction against even just one person with any of those felonies, and for some of those are property damage, some are assault on an officer, or rioting or inciting a riot, there is a possibility that that conviction against any one of those 190 something people could mean that everyone else who is facing those charges is also legally culpable for all those alleged crimes. So there's a very powerful thing that the prosecution is trying to make successful. And so therefore a very powerful thing that the defense, the defendants and their attorneys are trying to make unsuccessful. And that's a battle that's going to be happening on November 20th and going all the way through the end of 2018. So there's a lot, right now, it seems like all of the defendants are going to go through trials in groups of about 8. The judge has said that there is a certain magic number where if it's underneath that number, everything is totally fine as far as people's constitutional, or so-called constitutional rights to a fair trial by a jury of your peers, all these other words that they use to kind of describe their oppression. And then there's another number, if you go above that, then it's unconstitutional and it's a violation of due process and whatnot. And the judge at one point says I think that's 8. We'll make that 8. And so then it's going to go forward in trial blocks of 8. So that's how things are organized right now. It was very clear from early on that the prosecution was going to try to put everybody who they alleged destroyed property, broke windows or whatnot, on trial early and use that as a way of kind of steamrolling everybody. There was a mostly successful effort to get people who were not alleged to have done those very particularized things on trial earlier in an attempt to kind of thwart that prosecution's effort to steamroll the trials. That's what's going to be happening on November 20th is people who were not alleged to have destroyed property and whatnot are going on to trial. But it doesn't mean that it's a less significant trial where it's less risky. Everybody's still facing 75 years in prison. And it's still very high stakes and it means a lot. So since January 21st, basically, there's been a lot of organizing all across the country. It's been happening in various ways that, the prosecution, the feds, and all that I'd be very interested in talking about, so I'm not going to talk about that. But it's basically if you can imagine a whole bunch of very complicated conference calls that take a long time, and electronic communications, and tears and stress, and eating sweets afterwards, it's that kind of stuff, for months and months and months, trying to figure out how do we organize in various ways. Some of that is regional, some of that is based on different working groups that do things media or social media, or figuring out what are some good collective legal defense strategies and whatnot. So there's all this very elaborate organizing that we hope will ultimately end in the prosecution being totally demolished at trial and our comrades going free. But we have no idea how things are going to shake out. There are a lot of things that people can do, it's important solidarity, and a lot of things that people across the country have been doing. So raising awareness of the case is a very basic one. There have been different regional kind of support crews that have formed to support groups of defendants and also to get involved in solidarity and stuff overall. So people here, people wherever people are coming from, if you don't have something like that in place, you can definitely do that. We're also working on doing a different trial support for each trial block. So again, the first one's November 20th, the second one's December 11th. And that could be things like if a crew of people is coming into town, into DC, to do like to be in court and all that, connecting with us who are like those of us who are doing this support organizing, figure out how can you help out with taking court notes, how can you help out with like cooking meals to help feed the defendants, are there fundraisers you can do before you leave your homes in order to help support and raise that solidarity. When people are going to trial for DC, that's basically moving to DC for a couple of weeks or maybe a month or more. And that's again going to be groups of at least 8. A lot of people have their significant others, partners, however they want to define it, or other direct support people who be there with them for the entirety of the trial. So we're looking at 8 to 16 people who are going to need to be in DC for weeks at a time, possibly more than a month, as well as other people coming into town to support them from all over the place. All that stuff costs a lot of money. We figure out housing, transportation, food, and all that for multiple weeks for dozens of people. It's a lot. So there's fundraisers up. You go to the FemJ20resistance.org. That's a place to figure out, see what's happening, what things are coming up, kind of read some of the motions that have happened in the trial so far. I recommend that if you are either a legal nerd or a glutton for punishment. Otherwise, to go to the rest of the website where you can find out what is happening, how to get involved, and how to support. The fundraising link is a great place to donate. Or if you do a regional crew and want to collect cash, bring to DC, help people out, all that's very, very necessary. It's also really important to think about this in long term. So the first trial is November 20th, second trial is December 11th. The other ones they're scheduled through October of 2018. Things can get pushed back in trials a lot. And then this case, because there's still over 190 people who are facing charges, still facing 75 years in prison, this could very well be something that while people are going through trial, other people are being sentenced if they got convicted at trial. So there could be multiple stages of support for people pre-trial, during trial, post-trial, all at the same time over at least the next year. So we're going to need a lot of very robust support and solidarity, and hopefully we won't need any long-term solidarity for any of our comrades. But we have to prepare for that possibility to support them while they're in the cages. I'll leave it at that.
My name is Jess. Like I said, I came out to Standing Rock Resistance to fight the can anyone hear me? Cool. Alright, the DAPL pipeline up in Standing Rock. I had no legal experience before that, so there's a few people in this room that have been super helpful in terms of helping me learn all this kind of on the fly. The first day that I was in the legal tent, which is now known as Red Dress Day, there was about 30 felonies, and it was really a heightened escalation, but I'm going to kind of flesh out everything that came before that and what's it leading up to. So like I said, there's about 830 state cases right now, or that have been charged throughout the duration of the camp once direct action started to be using as a tactic. So that started in about August and went up until February 23rd when they eventually raided the main camp that was across from the Pueblo River. But anyway, so there's many huge arrests that had led up to that, and it was a growing escalation. We're dealing right now with cases from October 22nd where there was 142 people arrested, and then following that was October 27th where about 125 people arrested. That's where they raided North Camp, or the frontline camp, and that's when the barricades went up on fire. And relating to that, there are now 7 federal cases, one of which everyone's most well familiar with is Red Fawn. Her charges are actually not related to the barricades going up, unlike everybody else, but she is also facing many, many years being accused of setting off a gun with prior felony charges. So that's one thing that's enwrapped in the October 27th date. Her trial was supposed to be in December, but it's finally gotten continued until January. That will probably be a firm date as so much shall go forward. The other 6 defendants that are facing trials are also indigenous folks. One person has been segregated from the others because there's 2 fires that went on that day. There was a fire that was on 1806 and then the one on the County Road 134. So 5 of the charges that came from a related grand jury from a sealed indictment are to the 134 bridge, whereas one person whose name is Littlefeather, who also goes by Michael Gearing, his is related to the 1806 fire. I want to bring him up in particular because there's been a lot of articles about the folks who are facing federal charges. He is often left out because his indictment was separate from the other indictment that had the 5 indigenous men that's not related to Red Fawn. But it's really important to know that he is out there. He is also needing support. Both him and Red Fawn have been sitting in custody pre-trial. Red Fawn's been in jail for almost a full year now, and he's been in jail since January on his way actually out to go to J20 and then got picked up on the way. So October 27th, before I get too far into the details with the federal stuff, it's some of the like exciting lessons that we gleaned that might not be surprising to anybody here, but like actually going through all the nitty-gritty details for all these state cases is that when you create such a large moment of panic and chaos like that, they actually like fuck up royally. Most people didn't have arresting officers, they have like very limited information, and because of that we've seen over 300 cases dismissed. With a handful of acquittals, but they're just dismissing them in large. They're trying to solicit pleas from people at the very last moment, trying to, put pressure on people to not having to return to North Dakota. However, with the 2 legal funds that were raised, folks are covered in order to get back to see their trial through what they want to see. But like I said, the amount of chaos that was created, much of which by the police, but by folks like banding together and not backing down, it's like demonstrating that a lot of these folks are able to like walk away and not have any charges brought on. A good plea deal. So, talking back to like the federal charges, they're all looking right now at 10 to 15 year minimums. The reason that is because all of them are getting charged with 2 separate federal felony charges. The first one is the civil disorder, which is a 5-year minimum. It was actually only ever used one other time in 1968, which was related to a Vietnam protest. Basically, if it's political, that's what then puts the mandatory minimums in a conjoined way, opposed to just like one or the other. And the only other time that it's been used after that is actually for the Harvey trials. That was directly after that. So I was talking to someone who said that, with the exception of the one Vietnam trial, this is the only time that the civil disorder at a federal level has been used. It's been only used against Indigenous folks. So there's the 5-year minimum that's related to the civil disorder, and then there's the 10-year minimum now that's related to the arson that people are being accused of being part of. And many of the folks that are facing these federal trials aren't even getting charged with starting the fire in any way. They're just for being there and being on camera and like trying to use a good time to try to like break more and more people. So that's like the information that was like gleaned out of the grand jury. There's one person that was subpoenaed from camp to testify at the grand jury that we know of, and they got in touch with the legal collective, and one of my comrades here did a really great job of building a support campaign around that and really demonstrating for me for the first time to see like A, what a grand jury is, and B, the resilience and bravery people are willing to do and step forward for their comrades, even if that's 10,000 people in a camp, many people that you've never met, and is a hero. He had the charge dropped against, he had the subpoena dropped against him, most likely due to all the support that was like gathered around him. So it's just a really like shining example of the ways in which when people stand up, it generally works out. So talking back from that, I can talk a little bit more about the state cases. Like I said, there's about 300 dismissals that have already gone through. There's only been a very small handful of guilty convictions. There was 11, 8 were from the first trial that water protectors went against, which was from charges in August. And up until this point, actually up until today, every guilty conviction, and like I said, there's been 11 out of about 300 to 400 cases that have gone so far. They've all come from a jury because go figure you can't win a jury trial mandate in North Dakota. However, today, which is really disappointing, there's 5 water protectors that had their cases. They were from October 22nd. One person was acquitted the first day because she was a journalist from The Guardian. 2 other folks were acquitted as well, but 2 people, however, were convicted guilty in an outstanding nature now. This is the first time any water protectors from Standing Rock now are being convicted and are serving jail time. One person was convicted of one of their charges with criminal trespass, so she'll be serving 8 days in Warren County Jail, presumably. The other person was convicted of 2 charges and will be spending 18 days in jail. Relative to what Little Feather and Red Fawn have been sitting through, it's kind of a small thing. But for misdemeanors, it's really outside of the norm. It seems like the state is just like hell bent on like getting whatever kind of money they can out of water protectors and all the bond that's been posted, and just trying to regain any kind of the enormous amount of resources that went into repressing all the amazing work that was done out at Standing Rock. But to see that people are going to be sitting in jail, I think is just kind of showing like a chill, maybe. I think it only happened today, but nonetheless, like most water protectors have been able to like fight their charges and win and continue on the fight. I have a lot of critiques about like how many better things could have happened in terms of the legal collective that's standing out, and my own frustrations of like the ways in which like service model orientations toward legal service have been perpetuating, and my own complicitness in that. So we're really happy to talk about that and like voice that things could have been better. But what I have seen is some like things of hope, like not only winning and beating charges in mass and making sure that the prosecutors know that they're really out to get their jobs. Is also just seeing the ways in which folks with felony cases have actually been organizing with each other. There's plenty of folks, especially from October 22nd and 27th, that were facing felony charges for more for like lockdowns and things like that. But they've been doing self-organizing, so no one's been left behind in that regard, and like making sure that everyone has each other's backs. People have been getting really great deals, especially on felonies. I've seen now 4 pretrial diversions, which means they don't have to even enter or plead guilty. Many of their folks who were looking at felony charges have been able to plea out to 1 year of unsupervised probation with a deferred misdemeanor, which makes everybody feel sound and good. So that's been exciting. The one thing that has been concerning is the ability for the state to recharge everyone, because all these dismissals, for the most part, have been dismissed without prejudice, because there's no jury that's been taken into account, or never the whole bench trial. They still have the opportunity to recharge people, and that's actually what happened to people today that were convicted. They initially had their charges dropped when they realized they couldn't prove it on like criminal trespass or disorderly conduct by taking information from earlier trials, seeing if they weren't able to prove that, and then dropping those cases, and the next day reissuing the charges with warrants, which has really affected people's lives, especially if you still live in North Dakota. We've seen many water protectors have to sit in jail unnecessarily because the prosecution decided that the only way they could get people's attention was to give them warrants for charges that they had no idea about. We've also seen at least one water protector who had that happen to her. She was charged with a felony after the fact in January, and was actually put on a felony warrant and was extradited. So if you know anybody that has an open case out in state, and I would really like to talk to them, especially like if there's anything that could lead to them being detained. Misdemeanor warrants are very unlikely to get picked up outside the state of North Dakota. But I guess I'll just leave it at that.
First of all,
We're going to close out with Snotty-Nosed Res Kids' track entitled Water from their September 2017 released album, The Average Savage. More from that project can be found at snottynosereskids.bandcamp.com.
Yeah, before I go in, I got a question. Where would we be without our patriarchs? Dear mama, you gave me light and you gave me life. You gave me dreams to get me through the night. You told me not to follow Christ, that the creator needs no sacrifice. Thanks for all the good advice. Misdemeanors for the life lessons. If you wanna live, moderation is the essence. And I've never felt hunger pains, you've always kept me fed. But if it's my last supper, man, I'll take seconds. I'm sorry, that's human nature, man, we full of greed. No matter if we full or not, we look for more to eat. And I'm grounded now, mama, but I refuse to shed my feathers, cause that's not the way you taught me, no, I know better. But mama, I gotta thank you for everything, cause even though you're sick, you still provide us with the medicine. You never once complained, I'm forever grateful. You provided us a home, our conduct is shameful. Mama, we need you now more than ever. I can't believe the way we treated you, but late than never. I've taken you for granted, but from here on out I'll cherish you. And it's my open letter to show the pain that I share with you. You're giving us a life, my brothers make you hurt, but all they see is dollar signs while stealing out your purse. Man, they're never taking the time to see for what you're really worth. But the damage done is permanent, it can't be reversed. So mama, you really raised some shady people. You're giving them the world, but like the sun you see no evil. Mama was my teacher, but you're gone now. I know where I belong now, my mother's keeper. So mama, I refuse to see you die this way. I take your pain to fuel my flame, to fight the game another day. It's all mine's a pipeline. Show me what the cancer is, injected in your veins. I'll tell you what the answer is. Mama, 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 mama. Yeah. Mama, I know you're not the type to complain, but mama, I'm a youngin' that's got something to say. Dear mama, lately I've been bothered. I'm surrounded by this constant drama. It bugs me, mama, and it's causing problems, but I'm deaf before dishonor, so hear me out, mama. I realize that beautiful smile that shines so bright gives me the light and lets me know that we gon' be alright. I know these tears fall down from time to time, but who am I to blame you, mama? It's okay to cry. I finally understand your history. exactly what's been causing misery, and no one gives sympathy. I'm pissed off at who did this to your mama. It's starting to get the best of me. I never knew a man can leave you scarred and ripped apart, that leaves a mark right on your heart and leaves you out there stranded, forever damaged from those that took advantage of your mama. Defenseless, you have the disadvantage, and it hurts to see you bleed, mama, especially when the whole nation sees. Add an insult to the injury when no one does a thing, so we start protecting, cause it's just what we believe, mama. And they can never break it, mama, can no longer fake it. I can't shake it, mama, you keep on taking hits, and I can't take it, mama. The man is always harming you, and I hate him, mama. And I'm sorry for this attitude, but you're the one thing in this life I can't afford to lose. I can never imagine being in your shoes, so I'm dedicating this to you, singing. Hey, 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 Yapio, Yapio, hey, hey, Yapio, Yapio, hey, hey, Yapio. Oh, feel the spirit take control of the soul, cause mama's a warrior if you didn't know. Hey, 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 Yapio, Yapio, hey, hey, Yapio, Yapio, hey, hey, Yapio. Mother Earth. Hey, 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 Yapio, Yapio, hey, hey, Yapio, Yapio, hey, hey, Yapio.
The views expressed on the Final Straw Radio do not necessarily reflect those of Asheville FM, Friends of Community Radio, or any of the affiliate radio stations airing the show. From the studios of Asheville FM, 103.3 FM in Asheville, North Carolina, this is The Final Straw, and I'm William Goodenough. The show will later be archived at thefinalstrawradio.noblogs.org, and you can email us with questions or suggestions at thefinalstrawradio@riseup.net. Also, if you're interested in rebroadcasting any episode or segment of the show, you are free to do so. Just send us an email if you choose to do that. If you care to, you can send us letters at The Final Straw, care of Asheville FM, 864 Haywood Road, Asheville, North Carolina, 28806. The show is brought to you by Firestorm Books and Coffee. Located at 610 Haywood Road, Firestorm Books and Coffee is a worker-owned cooperative in Asheville, specializing in offbeat, underground, and independent literature. You can find a sample of Firestorm's catalog of books and zines, plus a full calendar of events at their website, firestorm.coop.